Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. My name is Dean Jones. I'm your host. This is season 9 and episode 16, and I'm so really very jazzed about my guest today. You know, we've made a lot about sourdough over the last couple of years. The pandemic that we had a lot of people staying at home, and people had more time on their hands at home. And as a result, they were trying things like baking bread and making sourdough. And sourdough became kind of a focus for this time period for a lot of people. And the internet became ablaze with talk about sourdough and how to keep it alive and how to make the best bread. And you wanted to get that perfect little ear on it. And everybody's posting pictures on Instagram and everything. And it just became a sensation, sourdough. And it's funny because I grew up with sourdough, and you always heard about old San Francisco sourdough bread, which I used to see across the street from where I worked in the San Francisco for 17 years. And you hear about it a lot, and you know sourdough. You see it in the stores. You can get regular white bread. You can get sourdough bread. Some places have all kinds of different types of sourdough. There's seedy sourdough, whole wheat sourdough, blah blah blah. And it's just really a crazy thing because we take it for granted. We don't think about it until you have to make it, and you have this damn thing you have to keep alive day in day out. To feed it like a pet, and you have to keep it going. And when it dies, it's what does it smell like? It smells different. Or you can make bread with the thing that's died, and it produces crappy bread, and it's just a whole ordeal. And there's so few, I think, true, outside of some master bakers and people who write cookbooks. There's not that many, masters of who really study it. And and hearing that there was a sourdough librarian out there was so thrilling to me. It's a thought as a librarian myself. I thought about it, and I think, how cool would it be to be a sourdough librarian or a bread librarian or a food librarian of any sort? But Karl Smedt, my guest today, he's an actual sourdough librarian at the only sourdough librarian in the world in Belgium. And I just was so excited to get a chance to talk to Karl. And he just stepped up and was just the best guest I could ever have. And I mean, I peppered him with like 18 questions, and he answered them all plus. And just no matter what I threw at him, he was prepared. He was just such a consummate professional. And I think the thing that I took away is he loves what he does. He works with the sourdough day in, day out. He loves it. He loves working in his industry. And I think for me, as somebody who loves being a librarian, I love talking to somebody who loves being a sourdough librarian. So it was just, a great time for me to get to talk to him. And I really have to, reflect on how much I love doing this podcast. I have a job I do day to day where I'm a librarian in a public library, and I love that job. Don't get me wrong, I love it. But I love doing my podcast. I love talking to my guests, and it's such a goddamn thrill. I mean, how often do you read a article or read a book where you think, yeah, I'd love to talk to this person? Well, I'm getting to do it. And it's really, really great. And I want to meet Karl. I really honestly I'm actually considering traveling to Belgium just to meet him, to go to the library. I mean, I really want to do this. I would like to be able to talk to him and spend time and go and see the sourdough. I mean, how thrilling would that be? I mean, and if you don't think it's thrilling, you probably don't even want to listen to this podcast. So go find, there's lots of others to find. But I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to Karl. Now, Karl, he started his career he got a degree. He graduated from in 1988 from a bakery confectionery school in Brussels, Belgium. And he worked for 6 years as a patissier in a bakery in Brussels. And then in 1994, he started to work at Puratos, which is a huge company. You may never heard of it, but God, I mean, people that work in the food industry or the grocery industry or anything related to food have heard of it. It's a big deal. Just go look at their website and look at their job board where they have locations all over the world. You'll see what I'm talking about. That's where he encountered the very first sourdough of his life, and he baked his first sourdough bread. And then he worked at different departments as technological advisor. He worked in product training and communications manager. In 2013, Puratos decided to create its first sourdough library, and he was able to be hired as the librarian for it. And he's been doing it since then. And he's become like somebody who travels around the world. He speaks about sourdough. He talks about sourdough. He writes about it. I mean, this guy is like the guru of sourdough. Well, I've gone on, and I just want to go on and like let you listen to the conversation because I want you to hear what Karl has to say, not what I have to say. But I just wanted to say, I've been doing this for a long time. I've God talked to over 150 guests now, and I love it more than the first day I started. And it's just every day, it's the best thing in the world. And I've been hearing from some of you, and you've been emailing me and telling me how you like the podcast, and that's so thrilling to me because God, I'm doing this, for myself, but I'm doing it for you too. And if you like this, I am so thrilled. I'm going to put my email in the information, and you can reach out to me anytime you want. I love hearing from the listeners. And because, I hope you love this as much as I love doing it, because this is just the best. I get in touch with authors and publishers and chefs and food scientists and food historians and farmers and people that work in agriculture departments and just everybody. And it's the best. I'm really living my best life here. I'm going to go on to my interview with Karl Smedt, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed doing it. And God, I hope I get a chance to have him on again because he was just, really fun. Here we go. My interview with Karl Smedt from the Sourdough Library. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today I'm talking with Karl Smedt, the librarian at one of the world's only sourdough libraries. Karl, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, Dean. Thanks for having me.
Now, you graduated from the Brussels Baking and Confectionery School in 1988 and then worked at a patisserie for 6 years. What at that time were your dreams and goals for your career?
Well, it's a long time ago. So from what I remember is that I wanted to have my own shop. I wanted to have my own bakery patisserie. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. My wife was not really willing to spend her life in a bakery shop. And at that time here in Belgium, it was like that. You have the mama and papa shop. And she absolutely didn't want to do that. So I took the decision to leave that place and where I was working as a patissier and start. There was an opportunity, there was a job opening at Puratos, and I decided to join the company.
So picking up from that, in 1994, you began your work for Puratos as a test baker at the lab. That's when you encountered the very first sourdough of your life and baked with it for the first time. What did you think of sourdough when you first started working with it?
Well, I only knew it by name. I'd never seen it. I never smelled it. I never used it. So it was quite a surprise when I got the instruction was go to the fridge, get the sourdough. You have to feed it. And yeah, I was very curious to see what it was. And so, yeah, baking my first bread with it was an eye-opener and was something totally new.
You've worked in many different capacities for Puratos. You worked as a technical advisor, product manager, and training and communications manager. Tell our listeners a little bit about Puratos, if you can, what the company does.
Okay, Puratos is a company that exists since 1919, so a bit more than 100 years now. It started as a father and son operation in a garage in Brussels. Today we are a worldwide player. We supply ingredients for bakery, patisserie, and chocolate. We have the one and only Belgian chocolate. We have, well, up to date, I think more than 10,000 employees worldwide. We have approximately 1,100 or a bit more people working in R&D and technical advisors. 2.4% of the revenue, the net sales, we invest in research and development. So we are really into innovation. We have around 83 subsidiaries around the world. We produce in 50 countries with 72 production units. We are available in 100 countries. We have 94 innovation centers where we receive customers to co-create and develop products together with them. And last year we had a turnover of 2.2 billion euro sales.
Wow. So in 2013, Puratos began its sourdough library. Now, this was the first and only one of its kind. You became their sourdough librarian. This is a very specialized vocation. What were your duties as a sourdough librarian, and were they predetermined, or did you have to kind of invent them as you kind of went?
we invent them all along the way, and we are still doing and discovering new things. But in fact, yeah, when we had this crazy idea of making a library, it was not out of the blue. We had already 43 samples in our possession that we got through different research activities that we have conducted on Italian sourdoughs, and then people heard about that, and they said, yeah, but we have a nice sourdough that you should look into. And so we had 43 sourdoughs from 5 countries: the US, Hungary, Greece, Italy. It's only 4 actually. 4. And so when we inaugurated, we had a 5th one from France. And this idea originated from a need to learn more about this century-old ingredient that has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Many generations of bakers have baked with it before us. And when we noticed that there was a lot of knowledge that was not available, and it is by starting with this crazy idea of making a library that you suddenly discover that there is even more. And every day we discover new things that we should look into. So what I do is, well, I take care of these sourdoughs. I do not do that alone. When we feed the sourdoughs every 2 months, I have always the help of someone that can be a colleague, but sometimes it is someone who has his or her sourdough here in the library. Sometimes I invite journalists to come and help me. So I don't do it alone. And then besides that, there is a whole scientific part that is generated, and knowledge that we gather, and all these. We have to deal with the university with whom we are developing this library. We have to do analysis of the sourdoughs that come in that we can do, and so there's more than me. I'm the face of the library and I communicate about it, but it's not something I do on my own. But yeah, it brings me to the 4 corners of the world to document the sourdoughs, to make movies about them, to go and pick them up. I'm asked to go and give sometimes master classes in one or another school, or I give keynote presentations, or I'm invited at workshops with customers to give an inspirational talk about sourdough and this kind of stuff. And then besides that, there is here the place where the sourdough library is located. It's called the Center for Bread Flavor, which is one of our innovation centers dedicated to sourdough. And so here we have, well, on a regular basis, visitors. Like tonight, we have about 50 Turkish distributors who are coming here in order to get inspired and see what sourdough can mean for their business and the bakers in Turkey.
What's the last count of how many different varieties of sourdough that you have?
For the moment, we have 139 sourdoughs.
Wow.
But there is more in the pipeline. Every year, I'm able to pick up between 20 and 24 new ones. That's what my budget allows to do. So there is this year, I know that I have to go to the UK because I committed to go there and pick up 10 sourdoughs. I have one that I need to pick up in Czech Republic. There is 4 sourdoughs that I'm going to pick up, 2 on an island in Greece. There is Mount Athos. It's funny because Puratos, the name Puratos comes from that mountain. It's a mountain that is where for more than 1,000 years only monks lived there. And I had the chance last year in September to go there and visit one of these monasteries, where the baker is using 2 sourdoughs, one rye sourdough and one wheat sourdough. And there is another monk coming there a couple of months per year, but he lives in Finland and he has both sourdoughs in Finland as well. And so I'm going to pick up the 2 in Finland and the 2 on this mountain in Greece. And we are going to compare them to see how they are different or what are their similarities.
I was reading on the website, and they mentioned authentic and Sapporo sourdough.
Yes.
What are those designations referring to?
It's 2 product ranges. The authentic is a product range that we call is an active bakery component. It is actually based on sourdough technology, but it contains dried sourdough, but it has its own fermentation power. So with it, we created a product back in 2000 that we launched on the market in 2005 as a very innovative product within the bakery business. And it helped our customers to recreate one of these very famous breads originating from Altamura, which is a small little town in the south of Italy, in the Apulia region, where they have a DOP nomination, so designated origin, protected origin. And it's just a fantastic bread based on a durum wheat sourdough that was already described in 37 BC. And so we turned that into a product where it's very simple. You have 100% of flour, and then you add 4% of authentic water and salt. And I'm always saying, when you open the bag of authentic, you unleash the spirit of Altamura, because it gives that typical flavor of this amazing bread. And then the product range Sapore is a range that we created back in 1994 when we started to produce our own sourdoughs to sell to bakeries around the world. And in the beginning, it was dehydrated sourdough, because if you want to ship sourdough all around the world, and in those days, few bakers had really an idea of what sourdough was. And so our customers used those in order to differentiate the flavors in their breads, if they were selling to different stores or whatsoever, to differentiate themselves from the competition. But in the meantime, this Sapore range, which means Sapore is the Italian word for taste and flavor. And if you play with it, you can also make the word opera. And so every product has an opera name. We have Traviata, Carmen, Fidelio, Otello, Aida, and so on. And so they all represent another kind of sourdough. We have these in liquid active, so that they are able to ferment in the dough and to generate all the benefits of a real sourdough that you would make homemade. But we do that not with 1 kg or 2 pounds, but we make thousands of liters at the same time, and we supply them fresh to our customers. And we also have the more convenient solutions where the product can be pasteurized, it can be stabilized with salt, or it is dehydrated. That is a wide range of sourdough solutions we offer to professional bakeries, small and big ones all around the world. And today we have localized our sourdough production already in 12 countries in order to be as close as possible to the customer, because we see the future of sourdough bright, and the fresher you can bring the sourdough, so the real thing, you can bring that to a bakery, well, the better it is for the consumers.
Now, I've worked in many archives or libraries or small libraries where people had collections kind of basically thrust upon them or given to them, where they've had to develop a classification system for it. I've seen this happen multiple times. So you were kind of given a collection of sourdough and basically tasked with classification, developing a taxonomy of sourdough. Was this daunting for you, and how did you begin to do it?
That's a good question. What we do here is not really creating a taxonomy. When we get a sourdough, we send a piece of it to Professor Marco Gobetti. He's a world-leading microbiologist in the world of sourdough, and that's our partner with whom we developed this sourdough library. And so what he does in his lab with his assistants is that they isolate all the microorganisms that can be found. That takes about 3 months. And then these microorganisms, when they are isolated, we are also able to identify them through DNA sequencing. So the taxonomy of the microorganisms is something that exists. It has been, so the taxonomy for microorganisms and mainly the lactic acid bacteria, from what I know, has been reformulated 2 years ago by a couple of colleagues of Marco Gobetti and himself. So this taxonomy is something that helps us to compare and study the sourdoughs. But the sourdoughs as such, we have them in big families. We have the wheat sourdoughs, we have the durum wheat sourdoughs, we have combined sourdough, because sometimes a sourdough, like we have one here, number 78, is coming from the US, but it contains 6 types of flour. We have rye flour sourdoughs. I have one with cooked rice from Japan. I have another one from Germany with rice flour for gluten-free products. So that's how we distinguish them one from another, or that we try to put them in groups.
Sourdough has had resurgences through the years. I've seen in my lifetime several times, like the 70s and the 90s, where sourdough has gained some popularity. But I feel like, with the pandemic, sourdough really came back with a vengeance. Do you think it's back to stay, and it's like not just a fad, or what are your opinions on that?
It's back for good, I think. And we as a company, we push, we have been pushing since 1994. To illustrate that with an anecdote, back in 1984, the chairman of the board received the question of one of the big hamburger manufacturers around the world, and they asked if we were not able to supply them with an ingredient to increase the flavor of their buns. And so Mr. Van Bel is the person's name. He's also the sponsor of the library. Took the initiative of hiring a PhD student to do his study on the feasibility of producing sourdough at a large scale and bring it as a commercial product towards our customers. Now, 10 years later, in 94, when we had the factory to produce the sourdough, we had the product, we went to see that customer. Well, he went to see that customer, and they said that they were not interested anymore. So we had a product, we had a production, but we had no sales. And so luckily, we had thousands, 10,000s of bakers all around the world to whom we started to present sourdough solutions. And little by little, supermarkets picked it up, bigger industrial bakeries, artisans, and they all started to produce bread made with sourdough. In the beginning, it was with sourdough powder. Later on, when we saw that there was possibility to sell the product as fresh as possible, they converted to that. And little by little, this image of sourdough and the communication on sourdough breads started to happen in the market. And it's true what you say, during the pandemic on Google, and especially in the first year, the sourdough was the fifth keyword or search term that was used in Google. It has brought sourdough to many households. Many people have discovered what it was, started to make bread with it, and I think that now it is back for good. It has been part of baking history for thousands of years. The very first fermented bread ever has been baked based on sourdough fermentation. Yeasted breads, the way we know them today, that's since 1867, the first commercial yeast plant opened its doors in the United States, for instance, and here in Europe. So it's a very young and modern way of baking. But now that, thanks to technology, thanks to suppliers like us, sourdough becomes more and more available for bakers to use it. The awareness of consumers has raised. Everybody understands, I think, that a sourdough leavened bread is better for the digestibility. It has more flavor. It's just a nice piece of loaf that it delivers. And that's why I think that we know that consumers pay more and more attention to the quality of their food, and sourdough is a heavy contributor to the quality of baked breads.
You mentioned history there briefly, and I just wanted to touch on that because I've been reading a lot of articles where food scientists or historians have been trying to recreate baking techniques, say from the Romans or the
yes.
ancient Britons.
What do we have to learn from those techniques?
This is okay. Long time ago, the doughs were very liquid. Bread baking was mainly a female business. It was always women making the bread, baking it in molds and having very I forgot the word, very liquid dough. Well, not liquid, but very doughs with high water. And then in Greece and in Rome, it was the slaves who started to make bread. Now in Spanish, they say masa duro pan seguro, means when your dough is stiff, you are more sure to have a nice bread. You require less baking skills if you add less water into a dough. And whenever in history, when men took over, I really think that they tried to make it easier and had less baking skills than women, paying more attention to it and making dough stiffer. These ancient techniques, I have a little scoop for you, a little scoop. There is like in 2005, the British Museum asked Giorgio Locatelli. Giorgio Locatelli is a famous Italian chef based in the UK, to reproduce a bread that was found in an oven in Pompeii. That's called panis quadratis. And actually, Giorgio reproduced or tried to reproduce that bread, but he didn't use the proper techniques that were used 2,000 years ago. When I was in the monastery in September in Greece, I was able to assist to the production of the sacred bread for the communion. And I saw how they did it. I saw the technique of making that panis quadratis, which I will reveal later on this year. When we celebrate the 10 years of the Sourdough Library, I would like to share that with the world. We can learn from the past. I'm not saying that these breads were the best. I've eaten what I saw the monks doing there, like they did it 1,000 years. And if you do it like for 1,000 years, then probably 2,000 years ago they did it the same way. I believe that the breads we have today, not everywhere, but more and more, we see that, and I'm not the only one when I say that the breads we have today in a majority of bakeries are the best breads ever baked in human history. We have knowledge, we have equipment, we can exchange today with social media. If I post a recipe online tomorrow, 100 or 1,000 people are able to reproduce that with video, with images. In the past, it was just passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, or from pupil, from master to pupil, or whatsoever. Today, with the speed that news goes and experiences and knowledge can be exchanged, that makes that today probably never in history so much good bread have been baked.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org.
I've been baking sourdough for a couple of years now, and I'm one of the people that kind of got back to it during the pandemic and started doing it more. But I don't think I took to it really easily. I got frustrated a lot and just gave up and started again. And then I feel like after a few years, only recently have I started producing breads that I think were edible and good to eat. What do you think are some of the mistakes that people make, or the kind of common mistakes or misconceptions people have about sourdough when they start doing it, in your opinion?
Yes, well, there is one very important when someone begins to make a sourdough. So when you start from scratch, when you don't have nothing and you start blending flour and water together and you hope that the microorganisms start to kick in and do their job, what you see is that after 3, sometimes 2, 3, 4 days, it stinks. The smell is awful. And that is because the balance that is created between the yeasts and the lactic acid bacteria is kicking in, and the lactic acid bacteria acidify the sourdough, well, the blend of flour and water, they acidify it. And what you see then is that a part of the population of the yeasts that are always very active and the first ones to start multiplicating themselves, they start to die. And this yeast dying gives a very bad flavor. And then a lot of people, they are like disappointed. They say, oh, it didn't work. They throw it away and they try again. And they do that 2, 3 times. And then they are not willing to do it anymore. They say, well, for me, sourdough just doesn't work. You have to persevere. You have to continue to feed that starter with flour and water, because you will see after 5, 6, 7 days, you will get something nice, you will get something bubbly, and you will have that balance between yeasts and lactic acid bacteria that is optimal. And with that sourdough, you can start baking. A second thing that people do, and one of the biggest errors that one can make, is to follow a recipe by heart. The quality of the flour and the way flour is in the countries is always different. So if you base yourself on a recipe that someone has written from the United States, using a flour with a very high protein level, that dough can absorb an awful amount of water. If someone here in Europe or in Spain or in France or in the Middle East whatsoever tries to do that, we never reach those high levels of proteins in the flour. And as such, you will end up with a watery dough that is sticky as hell, and that will discourage people to continue. Secondly, each sourdough starter is different and is unique. So if I would give you my recipe and you would follow that, it might be that your sourdough is more powerful, that will ferment faster, and so you will end up with a dough that is overproofed, or your sourdough might have less fermentation power and probably maybe be more acid, and then you will see that your bread will come out of the oven as a brick if you would follow that to the letter. These are the 2 biggest errors that people can make, is following a recipe by the letter when working with sourdough, or not have the patience and the perseverance to go beyond the limit of the starter when it starts smelling bad.
You have, as we've said, many different varieties of sourdough. And were there any that you've tried and worked with that were memorable that you maybe liked better than others, or is that not the point?
Oh, Dean. Do you have children, Dean?
I do, yeah.
Which child is your favorite?
Yeah, okay. I can never say any of them are, yeah.
That's a bit the situation I'm in. I cannot say, oh, this is absolutely my favorite sourdough. I cannot do that. I know the people behind many sourdoughs, and in the world of sourdough, it's just, there is fantastic people. Although there are differences in between these sourdoughs, and some of them, I've been to the place, I discovered the bread in the place where I picked up the sourdoughs. So there is one, and I'm always a bit reluctant to say, well, this is absolutely the best I had, but I've been in a place in Turkey, near the Black Sea, in the mountains of Gümüşhane, where I discovered breads from 4 kilos. So there's almost 10 pounds, baked in a wood-fired oven for 4 hours with an amazing crust, an amazing crumb, lots of complex flavors, roasted coffee, nutty, that, and then on top of that, when the bread came out of the oven, they cut it open. They made a hole in the top. They put like a piece of 2 pounds of butter inside that melted in the crumb. By the time we went upstairs to have some eggplant, tapenade, olives, peppers, and so on with that bread, was one of the most amazing experiences with bread I've ever had. So that starter, I have it here. And that is one where I say, oh my God, this is like an amazing thing. But it's more because of the experience I had with it. I think that every starter has something unique, especially because it belongs to someone, it's the soul of someone. And with all of them, I believe you can create just amazing breads.
I've heard you speak recently about the myths of starters, like the thought that you have to feed it every day. What are some of the myths that we have about starters that we're kind of getting wrong?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think that there is a lot of myths going on social media or on communication channels of people who say, oh, I do it like this and it works, and I do it like that and it works. From my point of view, from what I see here in the library, for me, it is important that a sourdough is well maintained. And that means that you do not have to feed it every day. Because today we have a fridge. If you keep your starter in the fridge, everything goes in dormant stage, and the evolution or the conversion in your sourdough goes very low. So you can maintain your starter in the fridge. And many people just keep it on the kitchen counter, and then they are obliged to feed it every 12 hours, every 24 hours. So that's something people do not have to do. When you do not bake with your starter, do like we do here in the library, keep it in the fridge. The other side is that people keep it in the fridge for like 6 months, like 10 months, 12 months, more than 16 months. And then they post on social media and they say, oh, look, I revived my starter after 1 year in the fridge, and look at the bread I made. Yeah, that is misleading for some people, because they do not explain exactly what they did with it. But there is the one guy where I saw a movie on YouTube, and yes, he had to ferment his bread for 36 hours on the kitchen counter before he was able to bake it, after leaving his sourdough for more than 1 year in the fridge. Well, that's not how you will encourage people to make nice breads. You have to maintain your starter very well whenever you want to bake with it. And I believe that historically, bread was not sour. I'm almost 100% sure that in the past, people didn't like sour bread, for the simple reason that the majority of people I know, they still do not like sour bread. My wife hates me when I bake sour bread. And believe me, I've experimented a lot in my kitchen at home. When I make sour bread, I have to eat it myself. In the past, sourdough was used as a fermentation power, not as an acidifier of the bread. Bakers were looking. There is a book that states, it's a book from 1778, written by Augustin Parmentier, a French pharmacist, and he says, I feel sad for bakers because they have to feed their starter every 4 hours, and as such cannot sleep longer than 3.5 hours in a row. That is how bakers were dealing with sourdough in the past. They had no fridge to place it in, and sour bread was associated with bread that was bad for the digestion. The whole thing that happened is when commercial yeast kicked in the market in the 19th century. Many bakers stopped producing sourdough bread, except in countries with a rye culture. Germany, Scandinavia, Russia, Slovenia, Austria, Poland, because when you make rye bread, you need a certain level of acidity in the final bread in order that when you slice the bread, that the slices do not stick together. I think that for people who have bought already a rye bread, that they have the intention to stick together. Now, in those countries, when yeast made its entrance, they started to acidify even more the sourdough. So they went for long fermentations with sourdough. They build it up in 2, 3, 5 steps in order to get a very sour sourdough, to be able to use smaller quantities in production, but still have high levels of acidity, because they didn't care about the fermentation power in those sourdoughs, because the yeast that they added on top of the sourdough was taking care of the leavening properties. And then when in the 20th century, bakers started to look for ways to produce sourdough bread, well, the most relevant information came from German bakeries on rye bread. And the rye flour and the way of working was converted to wheat breads. One very good example, and I hope I will not offend too many people, but the San Francisco sourdough bread is like, okay, there is the one bakery that is positioning itself as the San Francisco sourdough bread with very acid breads. Yeah, I know in the US, many bakeries try to copy that flavor by selling very sour breads, because apparently this is the typical San Francisco sourdough, and it cannot be sour enough. When you see the new or the uprising bakeries that started in the 80s, and I have a couple of sourdoughs from those people here in the library, they do not make this typical San Francisco style bread, but they make very nice, not so sour bread that are more representative for what real sourdough bread should be. On top of that, well, in English, you have the word sourdough coming from, I don't know, did it came with the Germans, Sauerteig, because that also refers to sourness. In many other languages, there is no link to sourness. In my language, which is Flemish, it's decem, which means leavened, levain in French, masa madre, mother dough in Spanish, lievito madre or pasta madre in Italian. One proof of that is that in my language, in the Bible is written that they had to make unleavened bread to flee from Egypt, and it's ongedecemd, which means unleavened, and it's not unsour leavened, because the word exists as well in Flemish, zuurdecem. Zuur means sour, so we say zuurdecem, but the real word is decem, and it's a pity that in English the sour is always part of the word sourdough, because I believe that the breads of the future, will be made with sourdough, but they will not be sour. I think if we want to reach the world population, sourdough has to be used, but it doesn't have to be the typical San Francisco sour style bread with high levels of acidity. I think that's not how we will win the hearts of the consumers, but bringing bread that is leavened with the help of lactic acid bacteria, taking care of the fermentation during the process, so that when the bread is ready to eat, that it is more digestible, because that is what fermentation is about. It is already digesting before we will consume it. The microorganisms or the minerals and the fibers that are present in the flour will become better available for our body, because the phytic acid will be removed during the process. So it only has benefits for this 10 to 30% of the world population who is allergic to gluten, intolerant to gluten. There is like this a lot of people saying that they don't want bread, but bread is such a nice ingredient that, thanks to sourdough, we can help those people. Not people who are really gluten with celiac disease that cannot have any form of proteins. For those bread or sourdough bread will not be a solution, but for all the rest, I think that bread it has been one of the cornerstones of our civilization in terms of feeding the world. And I think that in the future, bread will continue to do that, and sourdough will play a major role in that.
One topic of making sourdough that people often bring up is something that I always struggle with, and that's what to do with the discards. What do you recommend doing with the discards?
Oh, there's amazing things you can do with discard. I have a video on my website, The Quest for Sourdough, where I created fleur de levain. Fleur de levain is sourdough powder. It was a bit inspired on what we do here in our factories. We make a sourdough and we dehydrate it. Now, when people make sourdough at home and at a certain moment you have discard, you can dehydrate it. So you can spread it open on a baking foil, bake it in the oven. You can slightly dry it at low temperatures, or you can really toast and grill it at higher temperatures, and that already will give you a different flavor profile in the sourdough powder that you make. And that powder can be used in order, when you grind it, you can use it as a dusting flour for when you make pizza. And then you have, when you eat that, you have this level of acidity that is high in discard. When it touches your taste buds, you generate more saliva in your mouth and you increase the flavor experience. So it will bring, well, it will prevent your pizza from sticking to the pizza stone or when you put it in the oven. But it also will have a taste enhancing. You can use it as a dusting flour on top of the breads, or you can use it as an additional ingredient. When you make your dough, you could add like 2, 3, 5% of that sourdough powder discard in your dough in order to create new flavors. I've once tried to make bechamel sauce with it and it works fine. If you roast potatoes, I once saw on TV Nigella Lawson. I love Nigella Lawson, and she was showing how she made roasted potatoes. And she parboiled the potatoes, and then before they went in the oven, she was dusting them with some durum wheat semolina flour. And I said, oh, that's a nice trick, because before then she put some olive oil on top. But if you do that with sourdough powder, well, the experience is it's like crazy flavors you generate. So there's plenty of ways. You can make crackers, you can waffles. I have a recipe for waffles that I got from Ione Christensen, a lady in Whitehorse in the Klondike or in the Yukon, who showed me. I'm from Belgium. I know something about waffles, but she just with discard of waffles, 1 egg, a bit of salt, a bit of oil or butter, and some baking powder, and you make the most amazing waffles that I've ever tasted. Pancakes are fantastic. So with discard, you can do so many things, so many different things.
Do you have any tips that you want to offer to anybody who's kind of listening to this podcast and thinking, you know, I'd like to take up sourdough and try it myself?
Well, certainly, that just do it. It's very simple to do. It's a very, very simple way to make bread. It is not complicated if you don't get scared and if you respect certain rules. So you need to maintain your starter. When you are creating it, you have to keep it between 20 and 35 degrees centigrade. Now in Fahrenheit, I don't know by heart, but it is like ambient temperature in a normal household during winter or summertime, and a hot kitchen. So it's that's the temperature where microorganisms are most active. And the warmer it gets, the more active they become, and the faster and the more they multiply themselves. So working at warm temperatures will make things go faster. But any type of flour could be used. Don't be scared and don't start with, oh no, I need to have this or that typical kind of flour. I've tried already many different ways of producing sourdough, and I've never been disappointed. Another thing is that you can use other stuff than the regular flour, but you can have fun with, you take a little bottle, you put some water inside, you put a couple of raisins inside, dried or fresh. You can when you peel an apple, keep the discard of the peel, put it in water, put it in a bottle, add eventually a little bit of sugar, and you keep it at a warm temperature again for a couple of days. Do not forget to shake with the bottle every day and release the gas a little bit, so that to avoid that the bottle explodes, because a lot of CO2 will be produced. And use that water when you mix it for the first time with the flour. That will speed up actually the process of making a sourdough. I think there is plenty of people that you can follow on social media. There's amazing bakers, passionate bakers all around the world who share what they are doing, their methods. There's probably on YouTube, you find tons of videos of inspirational bakers to do so. So there is no limit. Why people who are listening to this podcast should not give it a try? And even if it's not to make the most amazing baked loaf, but a pizza, a cracker, a waffle, a pancake will definitely make you happy.
Karl, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've loved having a chance to talk to you, and I'm very, very honored to have you here. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, Dean. Thank you very much for having me.
That was my conversation with Karl Smedt of the Sourdough Library. I hope you really enjoyed the chance to get to listen to my conversation with Karl. We have a link where you can check out the Sourdough Library and look at it and find out more information about it in the bio, and check out everything Karl has done, because he's just amazing. Now, we're going to have a guest on Monday, which is Jeremy Lee, and I can't even begin to talk about him because he was such an honor for me. If you're not familiar with Jeremy Lee, he's been on many television shows, such as Would You Eat a Lion and many others, and he's a famous, iconic chef in London. He's I think the most famous person I've ever interviewed, and he just was like, yeah, sure, I'll interview you, I'll do the interview, and he just was so completely humble and acted like it was an honor for him. I'm like, do you know who you are? You're really famous. And he was like, oh, pish posh, whatever. And he was so humble, but like, I am just really so completely stoked to have talked to him. And I have to tell you, like, I feel like if I died tomorrow and, I had to think of the accomplishments I had. It was, getting to talk to Jeremy Lee, and getting to talk to Rose Levy-Berenbaum, and honestly, many of my other guests, all of my other guests, really. But I mean, I've just been able to talk to so many really great, amazing, iconic people, and I don't take this for granted. Listen, I'm telling you, I am not jaded about this. I am not bored with this. I am not like, find this commonplace. I don't do this for nothing. I am really in love with what I do here. And I love the guests that I have. So I really want to encourage you to listen to my conversation with Jeremy Lee on Monday. He has a new cookbook out that came out last year, Cooking Simply and Well for One or Many. It's just, as books go, it's a work of art. It is not just a cookbook. It's a cookbook, yeah, but it's more than that. And it's just an all around gorgeous, beautiful piece of art as a book. And I love it. And it just makes me happy to read. And it's one of those books you hold in your hand and you're just thrilled and you're going to love it. And you need to get it. So please come to my conversation with Jeremy Lee on Monday. If you like this show and you enjoy the podcast, please share it with other people on social media, send it to a friend, encourage people to listen to it. I always like to have new guests listening to my podcast, and I like to widen my audience because I really love what I do. I hope you all are really having a really great week and can make some wonderful things this weekend, maybe from some of the chefs that I've had in the podcast. Until Monday, keep cooking.